Right, I'd like to welcome everybody to the Finance and Administration Committee meeting and special meeting of the Board of Directors of Marin Water on this Thursday, April 24th, 9:34 a.m. And I have a roll call, please.
Good morning. Director Larry Russell,
Here.
Vice Chair Diana Mayer,
Here.
and Chair, excuse me, Chair Jed Smith.
Here.
And currently not here or not present are Directors Cush and Director Sampson. Thank
Great.
you.
Thank you. And then I'm going to look for an adoption of the agenda. Today we have somewhat of a unusual or not as common meeting where we do have a public meeting where our head of HR will be discussing new rules regarding human resources, and so that will be open to the public, and that's why we do have a special meeting of the board. And then we'll go on to our regular items with the monthly financial update, investment update, and et cetera. So can I please have a motion to adopt the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Any public comments on the agenda?
Not on the agenda.
Great. A roll call, please.
Director Russell,
Aye.
Vice Chair Mayer,
Aye.
Chair Smith.
Aye.
Thank you.
Great. Any public comment on non-agenda matters?
Yes, Phil Sauter. Hold on, Mr. Sauter. I'll unmute you.
All right, am I in?
You are in.
Thank you. Today's our broom day in the valley, so I read ahead to the items I'll miss today and noticed that water sales by tier isn't on the agenda or included in the financial update, even though they may help explain some of the budget variances, such as why water use is higher than forecast and revenue is lower than forecast. As sales by tier information has been missing all year, I'd like to ask that it be included next time. During the last rate setting process, there was a lot of discussion around tiers, both for financial reasons as well as the role they play in demand management. I'm sure that pricing tiers will again play an important role in the upcoming rate discussions. I can't think of a reason not to provide information on water sales by tier so that both the board and the public can be familiar with how our previous assumptions are holding up and whether we should change them in the next round of rate increases. Thank you.
Thank you. There are no further speakers.
Great. All right, we'll move on to our regular items, and item 4A, which is the Finance and Administration Committee special meeting of the Board of Directors. And I'd like to have an approval of the minutes, please. Motion.
Motion to approve the minutes.
Second.
All right, any public comments on the minutes?
There are none.
Roll call, please.
Director Russell,
Aye.
Vice Chair Mayer,
Aye.
and Chair Smith.
Aye.
Thank you.
Great. Item 5A, we're going to have a public hearing and report in compliance with Assembly Bill 2561.
Okay. Good morning, board and other attendees. I'm Vicki Garay with the Human Resources Department, and I'm here to discuss the new Assembly Bill, which is Assembly Bill 2561. I'll go over, in compliance with this public hearing, I will review the district vacancies and vacancy rate, turnover rate, and recruitment and retention efforts. So AB 2561 is a new law that requires public agencies on an annual basis to assess and address vacancy rates within their organization. And this is done to help avoid the negative impacts of understaffing and how understaffing impacts the public service delivery and the impact it has on employees. This new law requires that agencies report on the vacancies and the status of vacancies and recruitment efforts related to those vacancies before adopting a budget. And the law also requires that employee organizations may make a presentation at the meetings. So SEIU is our public employee or our employee organization, the union. We did make them aware of this new law. We told them about the public hearing and invited them to participate in if they wanted to make a presentation. So they did not indicate that they wanted to make a presentation. So, the law also requires that agencies with a vacancy rate of 20% or higher provide additional reporting data. So that doesn't apply to the district. Our vacancy rate is 10%. So my presentation will be shorter than the average presentation for this requirement. So on the left side of the screen is our slide is a snapshot of our vacancies. And on the right side is the more detailed information. And so on the left side, you have like a summary of our vacancies. We have 22 vacancies right now. 3 are in queue. So for example, the rangers on hold because we have trainee positions and we want to give our trainees an opportunity to compete for that position. And once they finish their training, we are preparing to launch 2 recruitments. We have 6 recruitments underway currently. And we have 5 candidates either in interviewing and testing. So there are various stages. So we just recently interviewed for the customer service rep 3 this week. And then next week, our candidates will come on site for a practical exam to demonstrate their ability to and their skills in welding. So we have 5 recruitments in that status. And then we have 6 offers extended. And after those candidates are onboarded, they have accepted our offers, our vacancy rate will drop down to 8%. So, and just to give you some context in terms of vacancy rates, according to the Regional Government Services, which is a joint powers authority, vacancy rates for an agency about our size is about 15%. So that's the typical vacancy rate. The law also requires that we provide information on turnover rate. So turnover rate in the bargaining unit is 2.5%. So, but this does not include retirements. So according to the Bureau of Labor and Statistics, the turnover rate average for 2025 is 1.5%, but their rating is based on the entire organization and not a segment of the organization. So the law also requires for us to report on our recruitment efforts. And we, here at the district, we take a candidate-centric approach to recruitment. We try to make it as candidate-friendly in that we've revamped our materials. We have a platform that's more accessible. It reaches a larger audience and it makes applying for positions easier. We also have a text messaging function because we know that people are busy. And so we can text our candidates and get an immediate response to help us move through the process faster as we're not waiting for people to check emails. We offer online skills testing so that to minimize people having to take off from work to come here to test for positions. And then a lot of times we offer virtual interviews where we have multiple interviews in process. So we just kind of try to make it easier. We have a social media presence, as you're aware, and our recruitment is targeted. We target professional organizations. We have also increased our presence in the community with community-based organizations. And so we're actually going to be at the Multicultural Center of Marin tomorrow, and we'll be at the College of Marin next week. And retention and retention is important as well, obviously, because we are doing this recruitment. We want to keep people here. We want to keep them happy. Benefits and employee engagement are essential to retention. And we have we offer alternative work schedules, telework, commuter benefits, tuition, where we pay up to $75 per month for commuter benefits. And we also offer competitive compensation on the benefit side. On the employee engagement side, we have a new employee onboarding program that I presented to the board at the last FAC. We provide training and development. We're working on a training and development program for employees, which is going to be a long-term training, which is about 5-year program. You've participated in our employee events, and we have where we have peer recognition awards and service awards for milestones for employees who have reached certain milestones as in terms of their time here with the district. We've met the Ripple Committee. The Ripple Committee provided a presentation to the board. They are working on a team building. They have actually completed a team building policy, which encourages gatherings within employee work groups, and they're also working on a job shadowing program. We have a job share program. We've only had one person use the program, but the person used the program to complete a bachelor's degree at UC Berkeley by having the opportunity to share her position with someone else while she attended school during the day to complete her bachelor's degree. And the district offers career advancement through flex staffing. And through the flex staffing program, we had 5 promotions last year in 2024. And for competitive promotions, 19 people promoted in 2024. So also part of engagement is meaningful work projects, and you've seen those demonstrated or illustrated at our employee events and some of the board presentations that have come before you with respect to capital projects. So our next steps are continue to enhance our recruitment efforts and to continue advancing employee engagement initiatives so that we can keep our vacancy rate low. And keep people happy. That's more important.
Terrific.
And that concludes my presentation for this.
All right,
Public
thank you.
hearing.
Appreciate that. Part of what I love is that this is something we've been doing for the last 2 years now. So in many ways, we've been reporting on a lot of this, but now we're formally doing it and doing it a part of the newly approved bill. I'm just confirming that there's no SEIU representative that would like to make comments at this time, so they have that opportunity.
That is correct. There are none.
Okay, great.
No.
Any comments from the board? Larry? All good? Okay, great. Well, so now this is an open public hearing, and if there's any member of the public would like to speak. Thank you, Larry. Now is a good time to do so.
There are none.
Okay, terrific. And no more continued discussion. We've had our open meeting. I think we're ready to move on to 6A. Thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Vicki.
All set.
I'm sorry, Chair, could we just note for the record that we're closing the public hearing
Now
as
we'll
well?
close the public hearing.
Okay, thanks.
Want me to gavel it? Closed. Okay, thank you. Gavelled. All right. Item 6A, our monthly financial update with our head of finance, Brett Uppendahl.
All right, good morning, Chair Smith and Vice Chair Mayor. My name is Brett Uppendahl, District's Finance Director. I have 3 items for you this morning. The first one is our regular monthly financial update. We are now at 9 months of the fiscal year, which makes 75%. And so you can see here revenues tracking almost exactly at that 74% as we kind of make our way through the winter months. Revenue there at the bottom, capital revenue, a fixed fee as you'd expect as well, 75%. So I think this 9 months, as you may recall, would be an odd number of months. And so we only have one billing cycle. So we have about half of the districts in here for the current billing cycle. So I'll be looking a lot closer at this next month over in overall revenue and expenses, just to kind of get a final kind of year-end projection and wrap that into the budget planning discussion. But I'm waiting to see really what's happening on the April revenues to kind of round out this picture. But expenses are obviously independent of our billing cycle. So this here is a updated look again as of 75% of the fiscal year, tracking lower as we have all year, and personnel services there right around 70%. That's aligning relatively well with what Vicky just reported, having about a 10% vacancy rate. So that's held pretty steady the last few months. And I think Vicky did note in the last item that we have quite a few recruitments in progress, and we're expecting to be filling a lot of those positions. So this number may tick up later kind of in the fiscal year. We expect it to be much closer next year as we get closer and closer back to that kind of full district staffing level. Maintenance operations has been lagging for a good part of the year, and I think part of that is just seasonal. We do a lot more of our kind of more expensive work in the summertime. I think we were fortunate this year to have less expenses in some of our paving contracts for some of our leak repairs. And so you'll note that here is probably dragging the overall percent down, which is a good thing. And we'll also talk about it in the upcoming budget item for and projected savings towards the end of the year. Obviously, that's still to be determined, the actuals. I mean, we have to respond to leaks when we get there, but I think we are noting a good trend downward, or at least flattening in some of those paving contracts. I would also note that water purchases are also in this line, and that's another big line item. I'll talk about again in the upcoming budget review. But we have been much closer to the minimum this full year as we've had another nice wet winter. And so we expect that again to finish the year less than the budget. And so I'm not expecting the maintenance operations to catch up as quickly or to really be anywhere close to, the linear trend of 75% at this point, which is a good thing. That's a savings to the district. Financing and capital allocation, those are straight line allocations. So those will always, for the most part, be running in parallel with the fiscal year trajectory. And then capital expenses down there towards the bottom. We are working towards encumbering a lot of projects here over the summer. So we do have a lot in encumbrances now. And we're at 61%, which is not a bad place to be. But again, I do expect that to increase pretty quickly towards the end of the year as we get back into our paving seasons and some of our more active construction windows. Water sales by month here. Again, a familiar slide. We do this every month. And as I was talking about, you see there on the far left, we're at 9 months. So we're halfway through that kind of last winter cycle of the March, April. We were only 85% of our budget for the March timeframe, which I think just indicates, as I mentioned before, kind of a wetter, cooler winter, less overall water use. We'll expect that, as you can see from the budget numbers, to start ticking up pretty fast into April, May, and June. But we'll be keeping an eye on the April read there to kind of finish off the fiscal year in terms of projections for this year. And then we'll report back in the summer for how the total actuals were. Service charge and capital maintenance fee, again, those are fixed. Those are always going to be closer to that 75% number. And we're just at a little bit of a lower read cycle there. You can see the March numbers on the budget across the board are lower than the February and the April, because that's our kind of smaller month in terms of overall volume of revenue. So that'll balance itself out next month as well. And water consumption, again, is a nice steady trend here, as we've seen the last year or two of relatively predictable, slow and steady, returning towards our overall average, but still much lower than the peak years of 19, 20, and 21, which is, again, relatively expected, relatively consistent with our assumptions, and I think a good balance overall for the district for revenue predictability, as well as a lot of our conservation and kind of water efficiency goals. So I think we're hitting the mark pretty well here across the district. And again, we'll kind of take a look a little bit at that closer as we get into this budget cycle and the year-end cycle. And as you'll hear me talk about in the next month or two, we're really waiting to kind of get the year-end data full here, and then we'll start those preliminary work towards the analysis and kind of looking to the next rate cycle, and any adjustments or any insights we gain from that, we'll definitely share with the board along the way. So in summary, our overall revenues from the rate side, which is 95% of revenue, is about 3% below budget. So really within a nice kind of predictable range right now. That's offset by even more savings on our operating and capital expenditure side. So cash flow purposes, we're actually looking pretty good. Our total water consumption is about 4% more than the prior year, which is what we're generally expecting, and it's consistent with our budget amount. And then if you just look at a kind of a 1 month snapshot this month in March compared to the March last year, we're at about a 3% overall increase. So again, right in that kind of 3 to 5% annual kind of increase as we're coming out from the lows of the drought. So relatively, again, consistent with the last few months and relatively kind of helpful to close out the picture for revenue projections for the current year. And I'll come back again next month with kind of a final wrap on this for planning purposes. But this concludes my presentation on the monthly budget report. I'm happy to take any questions from the board.
Great. Any comments, Larry or Diane?
Can you just remind me that the service charge, watershed fee, and the capital maintenance fee, those are in each bill? They're not fixed. Is that correct?
So the service charge is a fixed fee. It's based largely on meter size.
Okay.
And so that's a fixed fee amount in each bill. The watershed maintenance fee, that's one that was a fixed fee in the past. And in the last rate cycle, we changed that to be a variable fee, a more straight line variable fee. So that should track generally closer to water sales in the sense of up and down with consumption. However, there's no tiers associated with the watershed maintenance fee, so you don't get as many kind of, higher reads in the summer and lower reads in the winter. It's going to be more of a straight line just based on overall usage. So we don't see the big, shifts seasonally there as much other than just the straight consumption. And then the capital maintenance fee is also fixed, and that's dedicated towards our capital program. And so those are, if you're from a customer perspective, the service charge and capital maintenance fee are the same every month. And then the watershed fee and water sales will change based on your consumption.
So shouldn't the service charge and the capital maintenance fee, shouldn't we be able to predict those exactly?
We should. So there's some billing nuances throughout the year. You get new customers, some customers drop off, they change the meter size. And as I was pointing out earlier in the slides, we do have an unbalanced kind of, 2 month spread for our meter routes, right? So 1 month we're going to get more reads or more dollars at least, for the reads, and the next month is a little bit lower. That's based just mostly on geography and kind of where the meter readers are each month, whether they have the kind of larger revenue producing accounts versus the smaller ones. So I like to kind of take it in 2 month chunks before I make any huge conclusions on that, because it really is up and down each month until you get the full read cycle in there. But yes, I think in theory, you would expect those to track very, very close to the budget amount by the end of the year.
Larry, any comments?
Yeah, do you book the fees, whether they're paid or not? If they're delinquent, are they booked, or do you not book them until they pay?
We book for these presentations, it's billed revenue, so it's just based on the billing. And at the end of the year, we make an adjustment for any delinquent reads that are beyond kind of the reasonable amount of time. So we look at that each year, but the data that you're seeing here is based on billed revenue, not booked revenue.
So Diane is right. It should be able to log it pretty straightforward then, huh?
Yes, in a perfect world, it should be pretty straightforward. Yes.
Well, AMI should help that out, right? Because then you don't have to rely on the meter reads of trucks going around.
When we get AMI, and yes, and we can kind of change our overall billing cycle and all that. Yes, we'll be much more precise, and we
Much
won't have
more
the big,
precise.
we won't have the swings, and it'll be a monthly billing.
Much more
essentially.
predictable.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of adjustments to get there, but
Yep.
if we kind of look ahead 4 or 5 years, yeah, we'll be much more.
Great. Thanks for this. One comment that I just thought of as you were presenting, I think we all understand that, like the energy business, there's a conflict between wanting to encourage conservation and water efficiency with revenues to run an agency. And I think that we recognize that from a global, longer term perspective, water efficiency is priority number one. We have to make sure we have water for folks, especially during down years. And so as I'm looking at the predictability of water sales and water consumption over time, I think it'll be interesting how we try to not have the goal to be necessarily more, but as Phil Sauter was saying, how can we really have targets that continue to decrease and to help our customers use less water? And one thing that might be helpful in this meeting, and you have the data, I'm sure, is and this doesn't have to be like every meeting, but I would be curious to look at your monthly water consumption over time So how does January look over time? How does February look over time? And what can we learn about water consumption and sales and predictability for our financial modeling by seeing when people use it and then why? You know, is it rain or what are the extra events that shift consumption and therefore shift our financial model? Does that make sense?
It definitely does, and that's something that we will looking at in the next rate cycle. I think that's what we do when we take the deep dive into the month by month and
Yeah.
kind of a lot of those more kind of complicated questions that require at least a full year or two.
Right.
And then that's why we actually bring in an outside rate consultant to help us make sure we're looking at that correctly. Because as you're stating, there's a lot of kind of factors that go into that between
Yeah.
temperature, overall water consumption. I think we look back at the drought of the 2021, 2022, there was so much state messaging going on as well. There's so much external factors that go into it. But we'll do, after we get the second full year in the new rate structure, we'll do a deep dive with a consultant and we'll be able to entertain a lot of those questions and
Yeah,
look for
things
some
like,
insights.
when I guess there's historically a bump up after a drought and consumption increases, or what's the sensitivity model look like from a financial analysis and just data analysis around how sharp that curve is and how much we should expect. And it looks like it's not as steep increase as it has been in the past, but I'm not sure. But looking at that kind of data would be helpful.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Definitely.
Any public comment on this item?
Yes, Larry Menikis.
Jed, I just want to add to that. What would be helpful is to have weather information, since all of this is weather dependent, because you can't really just tell by year to year. You're going to have to see what the weather was in March last year and so on and so forth. Thank you.
Yeah, exactly. Great. Anyone else?
Further
Okay, great.
speakers?
Moving on to item 6B, our annual policy number 33, investment policy.
Hang on, I have one question.
Yep.
Actually, two questions. I think I requested to Ben about 5 months ago that they include the weather forecasting. Paul Sellier used to give us weather at each board meeting, what's coming. I think that's a good idea. I think it's easy. Could go in the manager's report for that matter. The other thing is, I think we need to address Phil Sauter's thoughts on showing the usage by tier. That used to be in the general manager's report as well. And I think that's something that could be easily done and useful to everybody to know how folks are doing. That's it.
Thank you. 6B.
Let me pull my presentation up here. Hold on. Is it just behind hers?
Yeah, just go to share.
Since you-
It's the same as your, and then exit. And then it's
Gotcha,
there.
gotcha. Thank you.
Uh-huh.
Right, sorry about that delay. So this is investment policy review and just a kind of little bit of background for the board. So we do a quarterly review of our investment activities as required by district code. We do an annual review of the overall policy to look for updates. And this year in the annual review, we took a kind of a deeper dive and we really compared our current investment policy to guidance that's provided by the state, as well as kind of some of our peers here in the district, or near the district, I should say, in the area. And we reported back, I think 2 months ago, that we were taking a deeper dive. And last month we came to the board to talk about some of our initial observations and initial kind of recommendations. And then based on board feedback and based on additional analysis, we were bringing today to the board specific recommendations and actually a red line kind of overview of where we'd like to change the investment policy. And so we'll be looking to get additional board feedback today or committee feedback today. And then we would bring this back to a regularly scheduled board meeting for final approval. So we'll be looking for additional comments here, but we do have all the detail in the packet in terms of the red line changes. And I'll highlight the most important changes here as part of this presentation. I would also like to, before I get going too far in this, thank Shelley Riley, our finance manager, and Greg Plum, our finance analyst, who is with us here in the back, as they did the bulk of this work. And they really did a lot of great work in terms of comparable analysis and in terms of really looking into what is the best fit for the district's investment policy and for our practices going forward. So thank you, Greg. As kind of a high-level overview of our current investment policy, the 4 objectives are listed there: safety, liquidity, return on investment, and public trust. And so those really are the guiding factors for all of our investment decisions. And again, as I mentioned, our current policy and our practices are based on state law that governs the investment of public funds, and also just concepts of prudent money management. The permitted investments that we do have in our current policy reflect Government Code Section 53601. And then we do have a couple nuances that we found where our current policy is more restrictive than the state policy. And so we'll talk more about those in terms of the specific recommendations we'll have. But just to kind of take a little bit of a step back, just for the public's information and to kind of recap for the board, the government code already is very restrictive in terms of where we can invest our funds. So if you can see the chart here that Greg has put together, of all the kind of typical investments that you may see, if you're, paying attention to the investment world, about 2/3 of those towards the bottom, they're all prohibited anyway. So we don't, we're not allowed to invest in anything risky, in anything, other than real kind of just safe, again, safety of principal, safety of liquidity, and kind of prudent money management of public funds. And so we're really dealing with a very small kind of sub portfolio of options to begin with. In general, we don't permit, the state law does not permit sub-investment grade or longer than 5 years term or anything that's complex equities or complex derivatives. We're really only looking at highly rated fixed income securities when we're looking at the district's reserve investments. So in addition to looking at what's permitted, we also wanted to look at what, some of our larger peers do around here. And I would just, and we don't have Marin Water listed here, but just for context, you can see the total funds under management of our 4 kind of larger peers here. Our funds under management is more in the 100 million range. So we're 1/5 of kind of the smallest one here, which is East Bay Mud, and we're nowhere near what the County of Marin or County of Sonoma do in terms of their ongoing investment management, but they are kind of more of expert in this area. And so we did want to look at their policies to see what, how they manage their portfolios. You can see there's a range in terms of how aggressive they want to be within U.S. Treasury and federal agency funds. There's a range in how the different agencies like to invest their funds, with East Bay Mud obviously putting a lot more into U.S. Treasuries, and with the County of Marin kind of really heavily more in the federal agency. That's a lot of those mortgage-backed securities, the Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac type things. County of Sonoma's got a little bit more of a mix. But you do see that the heavy percentages there are U.S. Treasury, federal agency, and then if you kind of skip about halfway down there, medium-term notes are also a very common investment practice for this County of Sonoma and City of Santa Rosa. Money market funds are not used as much for the County of Marin, as they are more active, and same with Sonoma and Santa Rosa. But East Bay Mud still keeps about 15% of their portfolio of money market funds and mutual funds. And then asset-backed securities, again, that's only City of Santa Rosa. So you can see there's a mix, and that's kind of what we wanted to look at is, what are our peers doing within that kind of limited portfolio of safety and security and liquidity. And it was definitely, eye-opening to see, with these larger, when you have in the billions of dollars under, kind of public funds that you're managing, what you might want to work on. And again, we're a much smaller agency. We don't have, investment teams here. So we're really looking for kind of the best bang for our buck in terms of that safety, security, and liquidity matrix. And let me just point out one
Can
more
I ask
thing.
a question about that?
Sure.
Does East Bay Mud have a higher risk tolerance? I mean, I would think it would have to be the same for all the agencies, given the legislation, but I'm looking at the 15.1%, which is a huge contrast to ours. I know we want to increase ours, so I'm just wondering what accounts for that.
No, I think a lot of it just comes down to what kind of historically what they've done and where they choose to put their funds, and also maybe the transaction costs. So, let me just back up a little bit here too. The County of Marin and County of Sonoma, they're in the billions of dollars, and so they're not only handling kind of local tax funds, also they're handling the school district funds, they're
I
handling funds
see.
for special districts, and so they have teams of people that are working on active investments, so they can spread themselves a little bit thinner, and they actually it's more beneficial for them to chase additional yield if they have active money management, active investment management there. City of Santa Rosa is probably a little bit more of a hybrid where they may have some external funds, but it's mostly kind of local funds. And then East Bay Mud is going to be much more like us, where it's just really one agency's funds, and you're really trying to kind of match your cash flows with what's going, with the needs of the district. And so you can see there, even at the bottom, cash and other. I mean, East Bay Mud is really kind of more conservative, I would say, in the sense that they're keeping a lot more of theirs in cash and money markets, and less actively managed, compared to what you might see in the counties. So I think we would actually be closer to East Bay Mud's overall profile in the sense that 10 to 15% in money markets. We have a lot in LAIF. You can see they have 4% in LAIF. We have even more than that in our LAIF account. And then their cash and other is higher than you might expect. But this is also a snapshot as of 12/31, and they may have had some reasons to have to keep that, whether for debt service purposes or for contracts going through. But I would say when I look at this, I see East Bay Mud as being much more conservative and much more kind of straightforward than the bigger cities and the bigger counties around here.
The missing part here, Brett, is what's their rate of return?
Yeah. I would imagine it's all relatively, in a tight range. I mean, right now we're looking at around 4.5%, and that's kind of passive management of our current portfolio. That's going all through LAIF and all through money market. So I would imagine that County of Marin and Sonoma are closer to 6 and 7%.
I don't care too much about them. I'm thinking more of East Bay Mud.
Yeah. East Bay Mud, I would guess, just based on this portfolio, I'd guess it's very close to ours because they have,
Okay, can we not guess? Can we just give them a call and see if we can find out?
Yeah, I mean, just adding to that, I think I'm surprised at how different these agencies are, given they all are public agencies and they're just managing money for the most conservative ways possible. But these are very different instruments. When I was on the investment committee at Middlebury College for 9 years, and we looked at all the different peer results. We looked at returns over time, and we realized that the optimal amount of money at that time, this is 15 years ago, to invest as a pool was about $4 or $5 billion, and anything less than that, you couldn't really get access to good opportunities, and anything less than that, it was hard to manage on your own. And so what we ended up doing is we pooled our money with Smith College and Carnegie Foundation and Rockefeller Brothers Fund and some others, so that we could have professional managers invest it, all of ours pooled together at once, which did create an optimal return. I don't know if there are other public agencies that do pool money to look at doing it together. I'm just surprised at how different these are, and that you'd have to make these decisions on your own when there are real professionals that you could potentially hire to do it for you. And all of this goes back to Larry's question, which is, what is the best returns? What's the best of class way to manage these kinds of investments? And I would imagine it's very accessible to get access to returns over time and see how we stack up. And I don't think it matters whether it's City of Santa Rosa or East Bay Mud. It doesn't have to be necessarily a water agency, although maybe they have slightly different goals, but I doubt it. So yeah, it would be good to look at over time and how, if there's any opportunities for us to pool our funds with other folks to do it right.
So we can definitely look at East Bay Mud or any of these returns over time. It's all publicly disclosed, and all of us have the requirement to report
Right.
quarterly and annually. So that is definitely doable. What I would say is everything you're talking about in terms of pooling funds to take advantage of professional money managers.
Right.
That's exactly where we're going with this presentation and the recommendations. You can see there the third from the bottom is Joint Powers Authority pools.
Yeah.
And you can see that Sonoma and East Bay Mud both use that as a part of their portfolio, and that's something we're going to talk about as a recommendation. It's exactly what you're talking about, about, where smaller agencies put their pools together, you can get a much better access to professional
Yeah.
money management at a relatively low cost. And that's also, I would point out, that's exactly what LAIF is.
Yeah,
LAIF does
right.
the same exact thing, on behalf of all California state agencies. And so that's where most of our money is. So
Yeah.
what's exactly what we're doing, being a small overall agency that doesn't have a team of 5 to 10 people that can actively manage. We're trying to essentially, again, hold to those principles of, security of principal, liquidity, and safety, and still maximizing a return within those constraints. And so I'm fully aligned with what you're saying, and I hear what you're saying as well, Director Russell. And so we will report back on East Bay MUD's overall return rate. And in general, we're going exactly what you're talking about, Director Smith, in terms of trying to find the best pools for our money to be able to get the most return within that security and safety kind of profile.
Thank you.
Brett, I'm sorry, one last question. Can you say, and I might have missed this, but why are we comparing the county with East Bay Mud? Why are we doing apples to oranges? Is it because we have so little funds in comparison to them that it wouldn't be a big enough sample size, or?
I just think that, here, Marin Water, it's always hard to find apples to apples. We are a pretty unique agency. And so I think in general, when we look at comparables, we try to look at, kind of best in class. And I think the two biggest counties here, Marin and Sonoma, are good examples for what you can do if you have, the resources. And I think East Bay Mud is always a good example for a lot of reasons for us to look at, hey, they've been around a long time. They're bigger than us. They do
see.
have, a little bit more kind of ability to explore these. And so I think those are just good, all 4 of these on here are just, especially in this world of, it's not necessarily what we do, but we're just the public investment of public funds. It's just a good way to look at them. We could start pulling in a bunch of smaller water districts into this, but I don't think you'll gain as much kind of insight because they'll all just be LAIF. They'll all just be, cash. And so we wanted to get a sense for, if you went a little bit kind of beyond that basic profile, what are they doing? And so we could certainly add to this if you want to over time.
No,
but these just
that's
tend to be,
helpful.
good earmarks for us.
Okay, great, thanks.
Okay, so a lot of this I think we just started to talk about, but I will kind of run through it nonetheless. And so our current policy, in reviewing our current policy internally and with the board over the last couple of months, the size of our portfolio being closer to $100 million is not well suited to that investment in individual securities. That's kind of what you're getting at, Director Smith, is you want to kind of pull yourself together and you want to take advantage of some of those professional money managers. So our current focus has been on the LAIF fund, Local Agency Investment Fund, which is managed by the California State Treasurer, and money market mutual funds. So those are, again, very safe. They've been relatively high yield for us in the high rate environments in the last couple of years. But we have identified 2 categories that would suit our portfolio well to match kind of with our current strategy without any major changes. And that would be these joint powers authority pools, which I'll talk about here in a minute in more detail. And also just kind of the run-of-the-mill mutual funds. I think we talked about last month where our policy permits money market mutual funds, but it's relatively silent on overall just run-of-the-mill mutual funds. And so almost all other agencies that we've seen, and certainly the state level guidance, permits that mutual fund as a permitted investment. So we'd like to just open that up as a possibility going forward, especially should the overall rate environment start to, kind of come down a little bit. We need to, maximize our yields still within a little bit different investments. So those are 2 areas that we're recommending that we add to the permitted investments category for our policy. And to kind of go a little bit farther into joint powers authority pools, they are a local government investment pool. So it's a lot of small cities, towns, and public special districts that pool their investments together. They facilitate pooling funds for kind of maximum gain and for using professional money managers. It's very similar to LAIF, and it's very similar to what the county investment pools end up doing for all of their, like I mentioned, school districts and other special agencies that are kind of under the county investment pool. So it's a very similar process. They're managed by professional investment advisory firms. And these are the 2 by far the most common. One is called CAMP and one is called CalTrust. CAMP has been around since '89. They use PFM asset management. They manage a total portfolio of over $19 billion, AAA rated. Management fees are very reasonable, very similar to our current LAIF charges. And you can see there at the bottom, the trustees and then kind of the members of CAMP there range from, Merced County, Kern County, to City of Fremont, East Bay Regional Parks, and some Los Virgenes municipal water districts. So a range from counties to cities to water agencies. CalTrust is similar. They've been around since '03. A little bit smaller overall portfolio. You can see there, in the less than $5 billion total. They use State Street as their advisor. Their liquidity funds is AAA. They have a couple other options that are a little bit riskier in terms of short and medium term funds. So those are AA rated. They offer similar management fees, all in that kind of 0.1 to 0.16 range in terms of management fees, depending on which investments you're using. And here we see a little bit larger agencies that use them. We see City of Sacramento, Riverside County, Contra Costa County, and then Solano County and Elk Grove. So these are a little bit larger agencies that are in CalTrust right now. But nonetheless, I think this kind of lets you know that there's a wide range of local agencies in California that use these almost interchangeably. But I think we want to be able to just, recommend to the board for approval the ability to use either of these going forward, and just the joint power authority pools overall. And obviously, we would be reporting out on any actions and keeping the board up to date as we go forward with any investments we do make here. But we wanted to recommend that this be a permitted investment vehicle, generally speaking.
Just FYI, Brett, it's Las Virgenes. And it's a particularly well-managed water district that services Malibu.
Okay.
So it's high-end clients. They're big-time players in the recycled water. And they, I think, would be a good one to link in with. Who actually calls the shots in these groups?
Who calls the shots on that?
Who makes the decisions? Well, not us.
Yes, these agencies have board of trustees. So they have PFM and State Street Global Advisors for the overall management day to day. But when they make changes in the actual investments, it's done by a board of trustees. Yeah.
Right. But what are their qualifications? Are they just lay people like us in the financial?
It's my understanding that it's representatives from the individuals, cities and counties and special districts that are all on that board. So it's mostly probably the finance directors and or the investment advisors for each of those individual agencies.
So some qualifications in that area then. I mean, because you have fine qualifications as a financial manager, at least for the district, but I don't know what your, skill level is in investment.
Yeah.
So
The whole point of these is that you're hiring State Street that are world-class investment managers, and that the trustees, so to speak, would be the people that would approve general policy and direction. But this is exactly where I think we should be going. So
I agree with you, Jed. I agree with you. The question I have is, if it's a bit of the blind leading the blind. Okay, that's what I'm concerned about. And like I say, Las Virgenes has a great reputation, and they're very savvy folks. So anything they're involved with, I would be inclined to think that's a pretty good place to be too. I don't know the State Street guys, but I guess the most important part again is the part that's missing, which is what are their returns?
Yeah, we'll look at the relative returns, makes sense. But really what we're hiring is PFM Asset Management and or State Street Global Advisors. So we're not hiring the finance manager at Las Virgenes.
No, of course not. Of course
In
not.
Vermont to be Virgens, but it's a different way to pronounce it in different places. So yeah, so we're looking at State Street, whether those people are the people that we would trust. Yeah.
It's what they call themselves, Jed. So I'm just passing on the name they use.
Yeah, no, I know. It's just
Okay, so to kind of wrap in the recommended revisions, and again, these are outlined in red line within our current policy, we would like to add joint powers authority pools as a permitted investment vehicle. Not any specific investment, but that overall category of investments as a permitted investment vehicle. We would also recommend allowing investments in mutual funds in addition to just money market mutual funds. So to add the phrase to add the phrase mutual funds into that same section where we talk about money market mutual funds. We would like to match the state's limit of 20% to be invested in mutual funds. So currently, our current policy says 10%, and the state allows up to 20%. And I think we showed a couple agencies that do kind of range in that 15 to 20% here in the area. So we would like to have up to 20% in mutual funds, with a limit of 10% in any one specific mutual fund. There was an adjustment to the quarterly timing report to allow for a 45-day reporting window as opposed to a 30-day window. So we'd like to take advantage of that as well. And then we do have some minor edits to some of the definitions and some of the kind of finer points in our policy to clarify definitions and to align with the government code in terms of how they're representing these investments. So a lot of that is just to get more aligned with the state language in these areas and to be a little more clear in our definitions and some of the kind of some finer points of the language, just so that we're all aware of what we're talking about when we speak to our policy. So again, all these are outlined in red line format in one of the attachments, and this is a summary of the top 5 recommendations that we're making.
Does the mutual fund include ETFs?
So any mutual fund that we would be investing in would only be permitted to invest in the permitted investment vehicles kind of more globally. So we can't invest in any mutual fund. It has to kind of meet these, I don't know if you can see this here, these top treasuries, federal agencies, municipal securities, and CDs essentially. So ETFs would likely not be in that category. You can see fixed income ETFs, they're about halfway down, are not permitted overall, nor equity mutual fund ETFs. So I would say ETFs would not be in that category.
Okay. Well, that makes me more relaxed about the volatility. You know,
Right now we're using money market mutual funds, so that's one part of it, and they would just be adding a couple other permitted investments, which would not be money market anymore, but still under the mutual fund category. So it's just a little bit of extra flexibility for some of the medium term and short term notes that would be in those categories.
do you think it would make any sense, Brett, to go to our constituents and set up some kind of an advisory committee of the ratepayers? I mean, we have some pretty financially savvy people living in our southern Marin. So
I mean, as it is now, with the majority of our investments in LAIF and going forward, money market mutual funds and then potentially these joint powers authority pools, I think we're getting some pretty high level and pretty kind of standard advice and standard guidance there anyway. So I'm always open to kind of hearing more from constituents and certainly from the board. I just think in this particular area we already have some pretty standardized and pretty high level advisors here, but I'm always open for kind of more input.
I agree. I'm thinking more from the connectivity with the client, with our rate user base, our ratepayers. That they have the expertise. I don't question that. The question is, how would we utilize that, and would they even be interested? I think they would be, because I think this is something they really can get their arms around. Whether the information is useful or not, their input is useful, I have no idea.
Yeah, I that makes me super nervous. How do you bring people in? What exactly would they be recommending? What ideas that might have a conflict of interest? I'd say internally you have the team to do this, and you have a board that has the fiduciary responsibility to do this. And the whole goal of pooling money like this is to hire world-class professionals to do the work for us. And when I've seen advisory boards come in, especially in the finance realm, I've actually seen it go a little bit sideways. And so I would keep it professional, hire people for real, hire the best, and not have individual recommendations here and there and have an ad hoc. I think that could go the wrong way. But with that said, I welcome anyone's comments, and I think anyone that has input in the public, send it along. We'd love to hear it.
Okay, so next steps here would be incorporating the feedback here we're getting today, and then to return to a regularly scheduled board meeting in May with kind of final staff recommendations for board approval. So with that, that completes my report today, and I'm happy to answer any additional questions from the board.
Great. Any other comments, Larry or Diane?
No, thank you very much. Super helpful.
Great.
Yes, I do. Can you get those return information sent to us?
Yes.
How these people are doing? That would be helpful.
Yes, we'll do.
And the way I've seen it, it's super interesting when you start to look at the size of the agency and the funds that are being invested, and then the different mechanisms that they use. Cool. Any public comment?
There are none.
Terrific. We'll move on to item 6C. Update on our budget process. Thank you for that report, Brett. That was great. Appreciate your responsiveness.
I had it up. I closed it. Okay, 6C, budget planning report. So this is, I think, the fourth update we've had in January, February, March, and April. And so this should mostly be summary at this point. I have a couple of kind of new projections here. And again, I'll say it at the end, I'll say it a few times, but we're going to be coming back to the board again in May for a budget workshop where we're going to pull all these together because I realize some of this has been piecemeal as we're developing the budget throughout the year. And we did hear an update from the capital team on Tuesday at the planning committee meeting. And so we're going to bring all of those back together in one place for the board and for the public to review at the budget workshop here in early May. But today is just kind of continuing building blocks, getting up to that point. And so some of this will be review, some of it is new, and I'm happy to talk through it as we go. We'll talk a little bit about, again, the budget process, which you've seen a few times, our current budget overview for context. What I'm calling non-discretionary cost estimates, meaning they're costs that come our way that are just a cost of doing business, and we don't have specific control of those in the short term. And then I'm going to add a little bit of year-end projections based on where we're at currently in the budget and how that affects kind of the next couple of weeks in budget planning and potentially in the next year or so in terms of overall financial planning. So again, our budget process is an ongoing process. It really ramps up here now in the winter and the spring. We have finished our, finalizing our district-wide prioritization, and the board will have a chance to see it all together again in May at the budget workshop. We're going to finalize our revenue projections once we get this final April read in here in about a week or two. And so we'll bring that back again as part of the budget workshop. And then we'll be in the summertime, we'll do a budget workshop in May, and then we'll take board feedback and come back in June for the final budget adoption. So again, you've seen this slide, I think each and every one of my presentations, but I think it's helpful just to have that kind of context of dollars and percentages and whatnot. So we have a 2-year budget process here at the district. We are nearing the end of that last cycle and beginning the next 2-year cycle that'll be effective this summer. In the middle of it, we still do a mid-cycle review, so we still take a look at the budget each year. We just don't make any major changes other than the 2-year cycle. And as Alicia explained, we have a 5-year capital plan. So we're kind of always having this 5-year planning horizon, of which 2 of those are adopted budget. And then the remaining 3 years are part of just the longer term plan to make sure we have our cash flow in there. And we make sure we're kind of looking a little bit farther out than just 2 years for capital planning purposes. Our total current budget now is about 165 million. That counts operating and capital together. Operations are about 110 million, and that covers day-to-day maintenance as well as our debt service. And the capital fund's about 50 million, and that covers kind of core capital improvement projects as well as our water supply enhancement efforts and kind of some of those vehicle and equipment replacement activities that we have within our departments as well. I showed this slide last month, and I think it really, for me, it's at this point, we're really looking at some of the bigger moving targets. And so, when I look at the budget, we have our personnel services are about 1/3 of the budget there at the bottom left. We have our capital and our debt service, which is about 1/3 of our budget on the top, on the top left there. On the right is our operations and materials, and that's a little bit less than 1/3 of the budget, but it has some of our largest line items in there. The largest being our water purchase budget, and then we have a couple of our electricity and paving contracts right in that $5 million range, and then our chemicals and our insurance are the next biggest line items. They're right around 3 million each. And so those are the biggest kind of pieces of our budget, and also a lot of these are out of our control, our direct control, and so they're very important to kind of understand the sensitivities there and some longer term trends. I did a couple slides on each of these last month, but just to kind of review where we're at with water purchases and distribution, we're seeing about a little bit less than 9%, so an 8.8% increase in Sonoma County water purchases. And when we apply that to our contractual minimums, that'll be about a $750,000 impact for us in the next year's budget cycle. So, not small dollars by any means. Electricity, we're seeing right now about 11% increase year to date. And so projecting that forward, that's around a $600,000 impact to our bottom line next year. Personnel costs, so those are set. We currently have a contract with our unions, and so those are preset. Those are tied to Bay Area inflation rates, and so we know we're going to have a 3.1% cost of living increase next year. That equates to about a $1.2 million impact to our budget. The year after that will be tied directly to Bay Area inflation again, so we'll get that information in December of next year once we have another year of inflation data, but we try to link those to kind of cost of living here within the Bay Area and the North Bay specifically. Healthcare premiums, largely driven by Kaiser, but overall we're seeing increases of about 9%, and so that's about a $400,000 impact in the next budget. And then retiree obligations, even more beyond our control, largely market driven, as we talked about, kind of the range of returns with CalPERS and with our OPEB trust fund. Our healthcare contributions are increasing significantly next year by $1.4 million to a total of $4.1 million. I think I explained this last month. That's more of a return to the average, the natural average for this line item. There was kind of a one-time savings we had from the extraordinary gains just after COVID, that 2021 fiscal year. So kind of as things even out in the stock market, this is evening back out to this kind of general $4 million a year contribution rate. And we did have that plan in the budget, so this is not a surprise to me. And then our pension contributions, those are increasing slightly by about 7% there, just to about 10.4 million next year. And these are set by CalPERS again, based on largely on market conditions. So these are the biggest moving pieces that I'm seeing, and the biggest pieces that are beyond our control. But we are factoring these into the long-term financial plan. Most of these were generally expected. I would point out that you start seeing percentages like 8 and 11 and 7 and 9%, and those get a little ahead of what we projected in the rate planning cycle 2 years ago. But we were trying to be conservative in the 4 to 5% range, so we're kind of just trying to cover that last couple percent in the gap. But these are still pretty heavy inflation rates that we're dealing with in terms of trying to absorb them into our budget. Okay, so as I'm looking at the current year projection, this is the new slide. I haven't shared this one yet. So as we're looking into crystal ball, where we think we're going to end the year, and after our meetings with our departments the last couple months and kind of seeing the trajectory, rate revenue, we're expecting to be a shortfall. And I think we've talked about that most months. We're 1% or 2% behind our revenue targets, even though our water sales are pretty much online. So if you kind of project that out towards the end of the year, we're expecting about a $5 to $5.5 million shortfall in our rate revenue. So last year we were about $7 million short in rate revenue. This year, $5 million. So we're getting closer and closer to the budget. Again, for context, our rate revenues are over 150 million. So we're talking about 3 to 4% here in terms of a shortfall. Similar to last year, that's going to be largely offset by interest earnings. So interest earnings will be about $3 million more than we originally planned. So kind of the net revenue there, if you just take those two, rate revenue minus interest earnings, will be about $2.5 million shortfall on the revenue side. On again, 150 to almost $200 million budget. On the expense side, we should have a vacancy savings about $4 million, and that's consistent with the numbers we heard about a 10% vacancy rate. So we should have a vacancy savings of about $4 million. Because we're only purchasing the minimum this year due to the nice heavy winter, we'll have about a $3 to $3.5 million savings in water purchases from Sonoma compared to the budget. And with that and a little bit lower chemical costs, that ends up being about a 3.7% or $3.7 million savings to the district in the current year. I mentioned paving contracts. We've seen a little bit of leveling off and some, good progress made by our engineering team and the coordination with the cities around here. So we're seeing about $1 million, $1.5 million savings there with paving contracts. This is one that, again, is largely out of our control. We'll have to wait and see how the year ends up and see what happens here in the summer as we start to kind of increase some of our usage. But we're past the wet months of the winter. And so I think we're feeling pretty confident there will be a savings there. And I think 1.3 is about the right number. And then district-wide savings, we have a lot of little things in each department's budget, 100,000 here, 150,000 there. So when we added those up after our meetings with the departments, we think that'll be around 1.2 million. So the savings and expenditures, as kind of was seen in a lot of our monthly reports, is really going to be, beneficial to the district in the sense of, that plus a little bit of revenue shortfall. The bottom line is a $7.7 million savings. So that means that we'll have $7.7 million in additional reserves for the year that we didn't plan on. And I would point out for those that are kind of following the budget more closely, we also have planned contribution to reserves. So we'll be able to make those planned contributions to reserves and to the water supply project fund. And then we'll also have this $7.75 million in expenditure savings. So we should have a good opportunity to talk about, what to do on a one-time basis with these one-time savings. And this is a very initial projection. I almost didn't want to kind of get to this level of detail right now, but if I'm starting to kind of factor in those larger numbers into our reserve balances, if we just let them kind of fall the way they would naturally fall, the board may recall we set, a couple additional reserve buckets up, reserve funds up the last 2 years, and we have some formulas that guide into these policies. So we have a minimum balance for each of our reserve funds, and we have a target balance for each of our reserve funds. And then we have what I'm putting in the middle there, where I think we're going to end the year in each of those categories if we don't make any changes and we just follow the formulas and let the balance go to our operating unrestricted there at the bottom. So if you want to kind of quickly go to the bottom line here, what you're going to see is we're targeted to end the year, well above the minimums in terms of overall reserves. Not quite at the target balance if you take it on whole, but the target balance really is a kind of where we want to be at the end of the 4-year cycle. It's not something we need to shoot for every single year. We've made significant gains in the last 2 years here in this area. And so I think we want to be prudent. We want to be reasonable about, investing the funds where they're needed in the district and putting funds aside where they're going to be best use. And so I kind of looked at that bottom operating unrestricted line, and unless we make any changes on other lines, that will be an area that's in excess of the target. And so I think that's up for board discussion and up for kind of discussions on how we may end the year here. And so as I'm kind of looking into this overall reserve planning, and again, we'll have to wait to see how the year shakes out. But as I mentioned, our policy currently has specific formulas for the minimum and targets. We're on track to meet all of our minimums. We're going to have additional unrestricted operating reserve balances. And so I think what we want to start talking to the board about is considering maybe an additional reserve fund there, that fourth bullet down. And we've talked about the need to start putting funds away for a building replacement fund. And so that may be something the board wants to consider talking about.
Yeah, if I could weigh in on that item, it's actually become increasingly important, I think, to me, but the organization, as I think about it, is over the next 10 years, I'd say we're going to be spending millions of dollars in this facility, either by design or default, right? And default means a new HVA system with the current structure, a new roof, without thinking about what a real investment could look like. And these are always tricky, investing in the admin building and ivory towers. And, it's just so far from what we're talking about. We're really talking about aging infrastructure that does need some thoughtful investments. And I would say, in an earlier slide, there was $4 million attributed to vacancy savings. That can be a place where we think about, well, we have this vacancy rate, everyone's working hard in a way, creating that savings, not by design, but the net effect, and thinking about that sort of money to start a facility fund, not only for this building, but we've talked about up in the watershed as well, to begin to think of that.
Great.
Okay, so we can consider, as Director Hornstein, as General Manager Hornstein mentioned there, a building replacement fund and any kind of, maybe formulas or guidance we want around that. I think, as you mentioned, tying that to our vacancy savings makes a lot of sense. And another thing that I'm thinking of, kind of bigger terms in terms of the budget, is we do have ongoing planned contributions to reserves each year. And I think as we're kind of talking about highest priorities, now that we've gone past our minimum and we're kind of in a good spot reserve wise, we can consider as part of the next budget cycle reallocating that planned contribution to reserves, at least for the unrestricted operating side, and maybe putting that towards accelerating AMI, which has been a project that's come out in terms of a high priority project that we want to accelerate and not kind of wait to implement. And so I'm going to be looking at that in the financial plan and kind of structuring that towards if we can put some extra funds towards AMI kind of on the front end, as opposed to just building reserves, as well as creating, another reserve fund for the one-time savings we have. I think that puts the district in a pretty good position to be able to be flexible and kind of begin the process, as General Manager Hornstein mentioned, towards kind of what's going to be a multi-million-dollar investment down the road, and at least start working ourselves towards that. So those will be things that I'm looking at in terms of finalizing the financial plan, but I would like to get any board comment and guidance on that.
Those are great ideas, Brett. I particularly like the idea of accelerating the AMI. Keep in mind that our neighbor, the development next door, approached us with a deal. The guy's name is Jim Helfrich. He lives in Tiburon, and he was the developer of the building next door. He approached us that they would, for a swap, they would take our general office building because they wanted to expand that project. And my guess is they're probably more anxious to expand it now than they were then. And they would build us a building anywhere we wanted to our specification. That was the offer that they made. This dates back years. It may no longer be relevant. I don't know, but I think it's worth probably touching base. I can get you in touch with Helfrich if you'd like to. So just let me know.
Great. Diane, any comments?
I don't think so. Thank you very much. Helpful presentation.
Well, it's good to see us in such a strong position that we've been able to help meet our goals for filling these really important reserves. These are not frivolous. This is critical for the ongoing maintenance and service to our community that we're providing. I love the idea of putting some energy into our facilities, both up in the watershed and here. There's some basic minimum upgrades that are needed. These are old and decaying, and I don't think, as you said, we should build an ivory tower. In fact, in the business world, and any corporations that build their giant headquarters and their new ode to themselves tends to be a good time to sell their stock. So we don't want to do that, but we do have some upgrades that are necessary. So I don't know how you want to go about that. Maybe, I hate to say a consultant, but maybe have some resources that you're going to put towards coming up with those plans. And it could be Larry's idea of partnering with someone else and doing something larger or incremental, which would probably be my recommendation. And I love the idea of focusing more on accelerating AMI. If we have those funds, that would be fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you. And then just to wrap this up here, as I mentioned before, we have a couple key inputs coming in to the budget, and we'll talk about those at the budget workshop in early May. And then we'll bring back that plus all the board's feedback into a final proposed budget for early June 2025.
Terrific. Any public comments?
Yes, there's one.
Sorry, that was very late. If this building is sold, and to Larry's point, and it's developed for housing, be really nice to see this develop for employees and service people in Marin. At least a percentage of it. I know a developer can't do it all, but it would really be helpful. And I think it'd be a very positive thing if it went in that direction. Thank you.
Love that. Thank you.
No further speakers.
No further speakers. Okay. Well, I think that concludes the substance of the meeting, and upcoming meeting will be held on Thursday, May 22nd at 9:30 a.m. And we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.